and that way, anybody misses anything, they can come back to it. Some of my previous classes and lectures have been recorded. I couldn't tell you which ones. Sometimes I forget to do it. So, but we're recording this one, and I will really try to record that. Let me just announce that tomorrow night I'm going to be giving well, not so much a lecture, but a class about God and evil, and we'll be looking at various takes on that question. So, oh, good. All right. So we got people coming in. And making sure everybody's coming. And so that'll be tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Also, I am making arrangements. There's this remarkable film called Sustainable Nation that talks about what Israel is doing about water and other things in terms of its ecological contributions. And the people who made this film in honor of Yom Ha'atzmaut are making it available for a week to congregations that sign up for it. So I've made that arrangement. You'll be getting information about that, but you'll definitely want to check out that film. It's a wonderful, I haven't seen it, but I've read wonderful reviews about it. And what Israel is doing is mind-boggling in terms of saving the planet. I mean, I could assure you that if the rest of the world were doing 1/10 of what Israel was doing, we would solve all of our problems. But Israel is mamash or la goyim. It's a light unto the nations, considering all that it's doing. Hold on 1 second here. Let's see. Yes, and I will definitely be recording tomorrow's talk. Well, definitely. If I remember to, which I hope to do, I will be recording tomorrow night's talk. But frankly, I'm a little bit shell-shocked with all of the writing that I'm doing. So I don't even know, if it weren't Wednesday, I wouldn't know what class I was teaching.
Hey, Rabbi, can you tilt your camera down a little bit so we don't see you we can see your whole face, not just from here?
How's that? Better?
That's better. Now we can see you.
Not so much to look at it, really.
I agree, but nevertheless.
Yeah. So, luckily, I'm not married to you.
Oh boy, is it getting hot there.
So that works out well. Okay, and let's see, I know there's somebody else who's trying to join the class for some reason has not been.
I'm here, Rabbi.
I'm sorry, Joel, hi, how you doing?
All right, how are you?
I'm hanging in. It's a crazy time, but doing good stuff. All right, so anyway, if you look at the email, you'll see that what we're going to be talking about today is social justice. And the reason we're going to be talking about social justice is that this parsha that we're looking at today contains one of the great lines, some might even say the greatest line in the entire Bible, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And that that idea, that concept of pursuing justice as a religious commandment basically revolutionized the world. It is one of the major forces in civilization, and the Jewish people have embodied this, let me say this, they have enshrined this in Jewish law to an extent that is mind-boggling. So that's the starting point of the discussion. Now, one of the manifestations of this in our time is a tremendous emphasis on tikkun olam, on repairing the world. And there's good news in that, and there's bad news in that. The good news in that is that when you look at the world, it could use some repair, and mobilizing the forces of the Jewish community with our smarts, with our wealth, with our sense of social organization, that can contribute a lot of really good stuff to the world. All right, that's the good news. The bad news is there are two parts of it. Number one, that people who are really hot and heavy for tikkun olam don't necessarily know anything else about the Jewish religion, which in terms of sort of the broad demands of sort of civilizational demands in order to keep Judaism going, social justice by itself is not going to cut it. And that's for the simple reason that you can find a lot of people in a lot of different religions and a lot of different cultures that have been influenced by our tradition that are also really hot and heavy for social justice. That people that don't have anything at all to do with Judaism. And so in terms of some kind of centripetal force that is, that brings us in, all right, social justice by itself is not going to do it. I mean, it can do it in the sense that if there's a good social justice committee in your synagogue, okay, well, that won't bring you into your synagogue. But in terms of our wider concerns, when we are making common cause about, the women's movement or environment or whatever else we're doing, that, we're going to be in there with a whole bunch of other people that are, not members of our tribe. And that doesn't bode well in terms of our ability to retain our communal integrity. All right, that's issue number one. Issue number two is that, we could all sort of agree that like taking care of disabled people or differently able people or poor people, that sounds like a reasonable social justice concern. But if you extend that, and if you look at the people who are concerned about those kinds of things, it usually doesn't stop there. It usually extends to a bunch of other things, like, for example, Black Lives Matter, or like, for example, the Palestinians. And suddenly people who start out with a social justice concern for, helping poor people, all of a sudden find themselves standing next to somebody with a sign saying Israel is apartheid. And so if our gospel, so to speak, is simply social justice, there's no measuring stick to decide like what's in and what's out. And we become dominated then by people that definitely not just are not members of the tribe, but are in certain ways antithetical to the tribe, to the point of anti-Semitism. And so making common cause with anti-Semites, that becomes a really problematic business. And
Question.
I'm sorry?
I have a question now. The issue is not social justice and another group. It's the fact that somebody else has twisted the fact so that the question of social justice and being involved, I don't think is really a problem, unless I'm reading something wrong.
I'm not hearing I'm not understanding what you're saying, Jay. What is twisted?
Groups have twisted this idea of social justice, and I'm just wondering if we sort of skid around that, we're losing the real meaning.
Okay, but I would agree with you, but the problem is in terms of pure sort of political logistics, we don't get to determine the agenda of Black Lives Matter or the Women's March or other things that we would normally want to sign on to. We only have a voice in that, but we don't have a determinative voice. And so what do? Do we sort of grin and bear it and just sort of swallow our Jewish concerns, our Jewish tribal concerns, so that I can march alongside? Or do I pull out and leave then that social justice cause to somebody else because I can't in good conscience participate in it? It becomes a very, very tricky question. And what we see is that there are a lot of people that are prepared to simply grin and bear it. They will tolerate levels of anti-Semitism and say, well, that's not really what the emphasis is, or, you know, politics makes strange bedfellows, or something along those lines. And they'll sort of sacrifice their Jewish tribal concerns on the altar of progressive politics. And this is a real phenomenon. I mean, we see this happening all the time. I'll mention an example of it, just one, and then because I want to get to the textual material. But it has happened repeatedly at LGBTQ pride parades that Jewish pride people who have, for example, wearing a Jewish star or carrying an Israeli flag are told that they're making people uncomfortable, and you know, they need to sort of remove their Israel Jewish regalia in order to participate. And then it becomes a question about, well, am I prepared to do that or not? Do I simply pull out of the parade and abandon that concern, which is an otherwise legitimate concern, you know, supporting LGBTQ people, or do I take off my paraphernalia so I can continue to participate? You know, that's just one example of the kind of minefield that has to be negotiated here, and this is for us a real concern. So you have both the common cause question and also the sort of larger theological question about, is tikkun olam the only thing you know about Judaism? And you could find a lot of people for whom that's it. Judaism is simply progressive politics. And that's a questionable proposition in its own right. So with all of that as an introduction, hold on one second. When I took it this morning, it came in at 9:30. Okay, so so what I want to start with is sort of classic text, and this is going to be real feel-good stuff for you. And then we will come to the critique of this approach. So if you look at Jewish teachings on social justice, that's one of the two sources here, put together by Richard Schwartz, who is I met many years ago, but who was on top of this issue long before anybody even heard of the word progressive. I met him in 1981. I met him for the first time. So he starts out by talking about justice shall you pursue, and he says, the pursuit of a just society is one of the most fundamental concepts of Judaism. The prevalence of injustice in today's world makes all the more urgent Judaism's emphasis on the importance of actively seeking a just society. And I want to underscore the words, actively seeking a just society. And people have made very recently, my kids have been talking about this, that in this very hyper-partisan world that we're living in right now, people have been spending an enormous amount of time, and including me, have been spending an enormous amount of time kvetching about the political situation and condemning the other side in the political situation. But the proportion of time that they are spending actively doing something about it, as opposed to kvetching about it, is probably 1 to 10 or less. I kvetch about it many more hours than I actually do something about it. And that is one of the problems. And we, within our Jewish circles, we are guilty of that. We have been guilty of that for a long time. In other words, you can go back to the 50s and 60s and 70s when Jews were very much on the forefront of all kinds of good things like the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and so forth. But a lot of that was a matter of sentiment, of congratulating ourselves for being on the right side, as opposed to actively getting up and doing something. So just to take one example, If you were like me, Jewishly involved in the 70s, all right, it was a matter of tremendous pride that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. All right. But for the vast majority of us, and including myself, there was a kind of vicarious redemption. Because Heschel was there, we have done our part for the civil rights movement, as opposed to us getting off our tuchuses and actually going and doing something for the civil rights movement. We simply credit ourselves on being on the right side. So this idea of actively seeking a just society is more than simply saying, here, 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 here. This is what's right. This is what's good. We have to make it right. We have to make it good. So there are two things about this justice shall you pursue. That phrasing, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, the fact that you repeat that first word is very uncommon in the Torah. Off the top of my head, besides God calling to people and saying like Avraham, mentioning his name twice, I can hardly think of an example of a place where two words are repeated that way. And so it is assumed that it's meant to teach something new. And so Rabbi Bachyu ben Asher says, justice, whether to your profit or loss, whether in word or action, and whether to Jew or non-Jew. Now, to hear this coming from somebody in 13th century is a statement of extraordinary liberalism. Liberalism in its most positive sense. All right, not politically liberal, but just humanitarian. That there would be the sense of trying to do right no matter what the consequences and for everybody. That's an utterly remarkable statement. The desire, and not just like if by contrast, think about Lakewood. Okay, where anything that benefits our tribe is good. It doesn't matter what it does to the other tribe. That's the opposite of what Judaism is supposed to be about. All right. Second, let me just make sure who's ever in can get in. Hi, Kim. Welcome. So the second part of it is that we are told to pursue justice. All right. It's not just that we should sort of agree with it. We have to actively go for it. We don't wait for the right opportunity to go along, the right time and place, but we are to actively seek opportunities to practice justice. All right. And there is a long list of other places throughout the Bible and later Jewish literature that talks about justice in all of these different forms. So let me share some of them with you. The book of Proverbs, to do righteousness and justice is preferred by God above sacrifice. The psalmist, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. And I just want to point out here that when they talk about justice, they talk very specifically about justice for the underdogs. The weak, the fatherless, the afflicted, the destitute. And this is, if you think about it, the opposite of the gospel of success that says that if you are poor, it's your own damn fault and you deserved it. And this is God's way of punishing you for whatever misdeeds, misbehavior, misbegotten lifestyle you have. And if you're successful, that's because God has blessed you because you're a good person. Right? This is a direct attack on that. Just a little bit of background that you might not be aware of, that one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton was so despised by a certain segment of the population was because of this gospel of success. And the argument, which may sound totally bizarre, but this was the way the argument went, The argument was that she wanted to do things like set up a healthcare system, all right? And a healthcare system like that is actually contrary to the will of God. Why is it contrary to the will of God? Because if somebody got sick, that was their own damn fault, and it was God's punishment for them not living an ethically appropriate lifestyle, a religiously appropriate lifestyle. So instead of them having to bear the consequences of their inappropriate actions and then, suffering from that and then seeking some kind of redemption from it by coming to Christ or doing whatever, instead, Hillary and the Democrats are trying to subvert God's will by setting up these social programs that will take care of these people. Now, I know that what I just said sounds utterly perverse and bizarre. I mean, I get that. I realize that. Right? But that is absolutely believed by a frighteningly large percentage of the American population. And I mention all of that because it is so distinctly contrary to the biblical approach, where you are supposed to look for justice for the weak and the fatherless and so forth. All right. The prophets go on. Learn to do well, seek justice, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Zion shall be redeemed with justice, and they who return to her with righteousness. By the way, a line that is of great significance when it comes to the Israel-Palestinian or Israel-Arab conflict. All right, that's an area that we must not ignore. There are people who basically say, the tribe comes first. It doesn't matter what you do in order to protect the tribe. And the Torah is saying something different, all right? Or the Tanakh. All right? From Isaiah, the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in justice. The holy God shows himself holy in righteousness. Now, think just quickly, the contrast between that and at least what we imagine Greek and Roman religion to be. In Greek and Roman religion, nobody was getting points for righteousness. Nobody was getting points for kindness to the poor. All right. It was all about power. All right. The powerful ones win. Here, it's not the powerful ones, it's the righteous ones that win. It's the just ones that win, or at least are supposed to. To practice justice is considered among the highest demands of prophetic religion. It has been told to you, O human being, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justly, to love chesed, which is basically kindness, mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. All right. The prophet Amos warns that people without the practice of that people without the practice of justice, God is repelled by their worship. Take away from me the noise of your songs. Let me not hear the melody of your stringed instruments, but let justice well up as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream, which, by the way, is where Dr. Martin Luther King got it from. So if you think about the civil rights movement, it is sort of, in many ways, the embodiment of the prophetic ideals that are being described here. He goes on to say that the practice of justice is even part of the symbolic betrothal between the Jewish people and God. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness, justice, loving kindness, and compassion. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. That comes from the prophet Hosea. And if you recognize it, that's when we're putting on our tefillin and we're wrapping the tefillin strap around our middle finger. That's what we say. So every morning that we put on tefillin, we're putting on our engagement ring with God. And we are talking about love and justice as being part of what that engagement is supposed to be about. The prophets of Israel, listen to this, were the greatest champions of social justice in Jewish history. The greatest champions of social justice, the greatest champions of social justice in world history, not just in Jewish history, in world history. All right. Nobody has pushed this idea more than they have, and nobody has been willing to stand up there to their society and condemn society for their failures to sort of institutionalize this than the Jewish people. Jeremiah rebukes the Jewish people when they fail to plead the cause of the orphan or help the needy. He castigates an entire generation, for in your skirts is found the blood of the souls of the innocent poor. Ezekiel rebukes the whole nation for using oppression, robbing, defrauding the poor and the needy, and extorting from the stranger. Isaiah and Micah criticize wealthy Jews who build up large holdings of property at the expense of their neighbors. All right, and you can find this everywhere in the prophetic books. Let me add to it just one current example that it just, my blood has been boiling over so much that like every morning I have to take ice water just to calm myself down. But I just heard that the latest like Small Business Administration loan that was sent out, like, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion worth or whatever, okay, that the vast majority of that went to not small businesses, but large corporations, contrary to the rules, and that 90% of the applicants did not get any funds. So here was this big thing, this big hullabaloo about how we're going to support the little people in society, and the vast majority of it was diverted by the banks to their larger customers because they can get higher fees that way. This is the kind of stuff that would have given like Jeremiah apoplexy. Right? It's exactly what's not supposed to happen. Emmanuel Rachman, former president of Bar-Ilan University in Israel, points out that Judaism teaches a special kind of justice, an empathic justice, which seeks to make people identify themselves with each other, with each other's needs, with each other's hopes and aspirations, with each other's defeats and frustrations. Because Jews have known the distress of slaves and the loneliness of strangers, we are to project ourselves into their souls and make their plight our own. And I would love to take that quote and contrast it with basically everything that is going on in our society right now. All right. The lack of empathy is utterly breathtaking and devastating. I'll mention one example. There is this viral video going around now of a doctor from Lawrenceville, Georgia, a small town in Georgia, reacting to the choice of her governor to open up massage parlors and tattoo parlors as essential industries that they're now going to open up. And she's talking about how she's treating these COVID-19 patients with inadequate protective gear, putting herself and her family at risk. And the governor is opening up tattoo parlors. And what she's doing is she's begging for empathy. She's begging people to understand how disastrous this is for her and for society as a whole. And that it is that lack of empathy, that true lack of understanding for the others in society is utterly corrosive. Based on these teachings, Jews have regarded the practice of justice and the seeking of a just society as divine imperatives. This has inspired many Jews throughout history to be leaders in struggles for better social conditions. The teachings of the Torah, prophets, and sages have been the most powerful inspiration for justice in the history of the world. And if you just sort of think about it for a second, just think about Western civilization. The you are certainly not going to get any of this sense of empathic justice, compassion, and so forth. You're definitely not going to get any of that from the Greco-Roman tradition. That was decidedly not their strong suit. All right. So any of that we have in the Western civilization is a transmission from Judaism to Christianity and Islam that has now shaped our modern and have contributed to shaping our modern society. All right. This all comes from us. It is all generated by our tradition. Now, I'm not going to go further with him because I want to go to the critique of him. I just want to mention that in this Jewish Teachings of Social Justice, it mentions several categories, several manifestations of this social justice. They are tzedakah, doing acts of loving kindness, being concerned about poverty, showing compassion, and using appropriate high ethical standards in business. Okay. So that's the sort of general perspective about social justice within Judaism. Before we go on to the critique of this, any comments or questions? Let me make sure everybody is unmuted. Good. Any comments, questions?
None from me yet.
I'm sorry?
None from me
None from you, okay.
yet.
Anybody? Okay. Cheryl, were you saying something?
No, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so now we're going on to this article by Liel Leibovitz, who writes for a tablet magazine, and he's involved in a podcast called Unorthodox. He is a very smart guy, one of the Cantor's favorites. And his article is entitled, Dear Social Justice Warriors, Your Religion is Progressivism, Not Judaism. It's time to stop pretending our politics and our theology are one and the same. And in the article, he's got a picture of Jews participating in a Black Lives Matter parade and Jews participating in a, well, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but sort of anti-Islamophobia parade. Let's see here. I'm not sure where exactly that protest is from. But all I know, it's an anti-Islamophobia. It's that Islam is not equal to terrorism, Jews against Islamophobia, and Islam does not equal terrorism, or some of the signs there. So he begins his comment by saying, as a Jew, I practice Judaism. Is that a dim-witted statement? I apologize. It's just that so many of our brothers and sisters these days make a point of telling me that as a Jew, I ought to do this or that or the other thing. As Jews, thunder the young activist, we should embrace the Black Lives Matter platform, even as it singles out the Jewish state, alone among the world's nations, for calumny and outrageously accuses it of genocide. As Jews, lectures the doctoral candidate, we should reject Israel's occupation of Palestinian lands, the single engine driving our people to the brink of disaster. And to hear the columnist tell it, we should even as Jews rise against the French ban on burkinis, the full-bodied wetsuit some Muslim women choose to wear for modesty's sake while bathing at the beach. These are all stirring causes worthy of consideration. They have, however, absolutely nothing to do with the fundamentals of our faith. Okay. We spent a lot of time debating who's a Jew, but we've neglected to ask the thornier question, namely, what is Judaism? Let's see. he goes on to say theologians really have to put a lot of time into that. It's a shame. We need this sort of inquiry more than ever now that every social justice warrior fashions our creed into a banner under which to march into battle. And I would mention that a book came out a couple of years ago about, what does Judaism have to say about current political issues? And lo and behold, when you went through the book, it mentions like 20, 30 of them. All right. In every single one, supposedly, Judaism takes the most progressive possible position. All right. Which, of course, is nonsense. That's certainly not the way Judaism works. It does not take the most socially progressive view of absolutely every issue that you can think of. There are probably a whole bunch of issues where it takes a very conservative position. I won't try and outline, which ones are which, but it's just sort of foolish to assert that, oh yes, on every issue, Judaism is synonymous with progressivism. And then Leo Leibovitz goes on to quote a Presbyterian named John Gresham Machen, writing in the 1920s, and he argues there that too many of his contemporary faithful have come to look at their religion as a blank screen on which to project the values of progressive liberalism. They've come to see Christ as a metaphor, not a deity, a gentle reminder to always be good and kind because kindness and goodness were, right. They read the Bible for affirmation, not for instruction. And they were always ready to ignore its teachings if those clashed, however mildly, with modernity's latest edicts. All right. And so Machen, writing in the 1920s, writing 100 years ago, says, these liberals might be very nice people, but they aren't necessarily Christians. All right. This idea that you decide on what your moral values are, and then you look in the Bible to find a quote that backs you up. That's a very dubious process. What happens if the Bible has a perspective about moral values that's different from your own? Oh, well, that was back then. They were primitive then. But if the Bible were written now, it would certainly say what I think. That's a really chutzpahdik position. All right. Now, it is true that our moral sensitivities are not the same as the biblical moral sensitivities. We have a whole bunch of examples of the rabbis in the Talmudic period really sort of objecting to, questioning, maneuvering around things that are in the Torah. They can't just take it out, but they're clearly trying to sort of dodge it somehow, interpret it away. So yes, there is a place for that, but that is there's really a clear sense of internal struggle with the text. It's done with trepidation. It's done with humility. It's done with an openness to the possibility that we might be wrong. All right. That's not the way a lot of today's social warriors look at things. They decide on what they think and then call it Judaism and then look for justification for it. Okay, let's see, something just happened. Hold on one second. Everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So he writes, what fun Machen, this Protestant minister, would have had he stuck around long enough to witness Judaism as it is today, turned by and large into such an enfeebled club. Had he walked into our shuls or read our publications, he would have despaired to hear so many of us speaking reverentially of tikkun olam, the commandment to repair the world, as if it stood alone at the core of our ancient faith, or as if world repairing, stripped of its specific theological underpinnings, were anything more than the vague sort of general goodwill professed not only by Jews, but also by Hindus, Zoroastrians, members of the Kiwanis Club, and practically every other sentient being who ever gazed upon God's creation and had the fleeting feeling that it ought to be just a touch more perfect. Saying you crave social justice doesn't make you any more Jewish than saying you crave pizza makes you Italian. It's a mood, not a belief system. And that so many of us are so frequently unable to tell the difference is dispiriting. So I want to stop there and hear your thoughts about this. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll comment. It seems to me that you know, we do tend to emphasize tikkun olam as a core tenet in the way we view our role in the world. So for him to suggest that that really is not that is not sufficient seems to me that it points to a lack of understanding of the other core tenets of our religion. So, you know, I'm not really sure even how to express.
Yeah, Alan, say that again. What shows a lack of understanding of the other core?
The fact that we seem to emphasize repair the world as the core mission,
right,
of our people. That's what we're driving into our children. That seems to be the primary message that our religion, our religious schools, our religious leaders, many publications seem to focus on that as the essence of Judaism. So for him to say that that's all well and good, but that's not really it, really it points to a deeper issue. And that deeper issue is that we tend to view our role in that way, and not without taking into consideration the rest of the teachings.
Yeah. So not wanting to trivialize it too much, but I certainly remember my mother saying to me something along the lines of, just be nice and don't hurt anybody. And, you know, that's it. You know, that's, if you asked her, what does it mean to like live a Jewish life? Just be nice and don't hurt anybody. Which of course, I mean, it's a nice proposition, right? I don't disagree, but think about it for a second. And here's an example. Let's imagine that you have to go to war. I mean, clearly, the Bible talks about war a lot. And when it talks about war, there's a bunch of blood and guts in that discussion. All right, it's not war in the abstract. It's war where you capture prisoners, war where you capture women prisoners, war where somebody's going to get killed and blood is spilled, wars of extermination. You got all kinds of wars of conquest. You got all kinds of stuff going on there. All right. If somebody wants to read the Bible through a sort of pacifist lens in order to sort of protest against the Vietnam War, there's a lot of distortion that's going to be going going on there. And we do need, it involves sort of telling the Bible rather than listening to the Bible. You know, you tell the Bible what it's supposed to say as opposed to listening to what the Bible actually does say. And that's really part of the danger. And it's an awful lot easier. It is an awful lot easier to say, you know, be nice and don't hurt anybody. It's an awful lot easier to do that than to teach the really thorny questions about, for example, chosenness, about sacrifice, about evil, you know, death penalty, and all these other things. That's a lot harder than teaching people to plant trees. So yeah, it can become the default position, but it really isn't necessarily what Judaism is. And when one place where you see that really writ large is when you think about Israel and its conflict with the nations around, right? If you refuse to grapple with what the Torah really says about warfare, then you're going to be absolutely, pardon the expression, disarmed when it comes to grappling with the moral questions of, you know, what you do and how you handle a military conflict with enemies. And let me mention a specific example of that. Right? There's a section of in Deuteronomy that talks about you're not allowed to chop down the fruit trees of your enemies when you're besieging a city. And people will often, you know, pluck out that verse in order to like condemn the Israelis for putting a fence through an olive garden, or, you know, or an olive grove, or something along those lines, or chopping down trees that, you know, for a military installation or whatever. Right. But when you study those laws and how they are interpreted by the rabbis, all right, what's clear is that you're not allowed to chop down that. Well, actually, that's not even clear either. There are some that would even say just to chop down the trees, you're not allowed to do that. But if it has, certainly if it has some kind of direct tactical effect, you know, this is a place that people are using to shoot at Israelis, so you chop it down so they can't use it as cover anymore for Israelis. That's certainly permitted by virtually everybody who talks about this. And there are even some people who say that as a process of demoralization, you're allowed to do it. That's not a universally shared position, but there are some people that say that.
So this is, we have a very nuanced religion, and I guess that for most Jews, and I'm not justifying those Jews who are using the mantle to campaign against themselves. But it seems that we have a very nuanced religion. It's hard to grasp. Everything seems to be open to interpretation. So if for him to say it's a mood and not a belief system,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's trivializing it. And it's not really a mood. It's a distillation of how an individual perceives their role as a Jew, based on what they have been taught on how to behave. You may disagree with the politics. You may disagree with the vehicle that's used. You may disagree with who the participants of a campaign are. But if you distill it down, it's more than just a feeling. It's a sense that I have been taught to care for others, and therefore that is the way I'm going to practice being a Jew. And and they can then, of course, justify participation in with Linda Sarsour, for example, and of course we object to to that type of association. But but I think I think he's being a little bit too judgmental and maybe a little bit too arrogant in his judgment, considering that not everyone who wants to do something good is because it's a mood and not because what they have been taught and how to behave in this world.
Yeah, considering the emphasis on the mitzvah of pursuing justice actively, to look at people who have that concern and say, well, that's a mood, is really to distort the degree to which they actually are trying to do a mitzvah. All right, there clearly are. Somebody else wanted to speak? Jay?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Jay.
I think one of the problems is that we try to use the past or the documents, the Torah, in the past, and try to use it in the present and the future. There are things that we just can't do it. When I think of aerial bombing that takes place in a war, how can you justify that in terms of the Bible, in terms of killing innocent people, etc.? Yet it is something that we have to live with, and it's something that we see today that had no correlate or no part in the past.
Well, I think that the short answer to that question, Jay, is that one has to distill principles that where the technology was obviously very different, but the possibility of killing civilians, killing innocents, was very much there, even though it was a much more sort of hand-to-hand kind of thing rather than the rarefied, impersonal, dropping a bomb on them from 20,000 feet. It's the idea of setting a place on fire, destroying it, kill everybody in the city, and so forth. There are limitations that were set up, that you can distill from the Torah and try and make application to the current situation. But I mean, and you can say the same thing about the American Constitution. You got this document written by a whole bunch of white men 200 and something years ago, and how do you apply that? Well, there's a whole history of jurisprudence based on it, and
that's why you have the amendments to the Constitution.
Right. So you have the amendments, and that's why you have the whole interpretive process. So there does.
Can you do this with Torah?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where that's why you have thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of pages of interpretation for exactly that reason, because you're looking at a document that's at least 2,500 years old, if not older. And making sure that you're applying that appropriately, that's it's hard. There was a rabbi at the end of the 19th century who, misusing a classic or reusing a classic Jewish line, made the comment. They asked him about telegraphs, and his response was "Kol chadam."
Hello?
Rabbi, you froze. I don't hear anything.
Yeah, I think the rabbi is frozen.
Yeah.
Well, it is
I
kind of cold.
thought that the program may have ended.
No.
Hi, Jerry.
His screen froze and his audio is frozen. I don't know if he knows that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Hey.
We'll give it a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Oh, he dropped off.
he's coming back. He's rebooting.
Yep. Hey, Alan.
Yes.
Alan, it's Cheryl. Did you have your grandchild yet or not
Yes,
yet?
we had twins.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Two boys named Max and Leo. And
Oh,
we have not seen them yet. They're in, my daughter's and husband are sequestered in their condo in Florida. They escaped the city before she gave birth in anticipation of wanting to be, in that environment. So I don't know if you have video. Do you see me?
I see you, yes.
Okay. I'm growing my beard until I get to hold my grandchildren, and at that point I'll shave it off so I don't scratch them.
I thought maybe it was just a quarantine thing.
Well, it could be interpreted that, but I had a very specific reason for growing it, and that's in order to measure, and we'll see how long it gets. Before I hope I see them before their bar mitzvahs.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they're actually 4 weeks old today.
Oh, well, Mazel Tov to you and your wife. And your family. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
I remembered it was soon because for some reason I remembered that both my kids' birthdays are in March. So I remember when you told me it was like right around their birthdays.
You have a good memory.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's all good.
I don't know if the rabbi's coming back. I don't know if he knows what to do.
I don't know.
Hey, Jay, are you still there?
I'm still there.
So,
I'm not showing a picture.
I wanted to comment on your comment, and that is you raised the issue. It's basically it seems to me that halacha is the halachic process is a very pragmatic process, and most of the rules are really practical and based on the circumstances at the time. So your issue of carpet bombing or bombing from above and having collateral casualties, I think the rabbi did make a point, and I sort of agree. That's the technology. That's what's required at the time. That's the practicality. It's not ideal. I don't know that. Obviously, I don't think anyone would be happy that civilians are killed. But from our perspective, I think that we have a pragmatic or practical justification for doing.
There's no question that we have reached this point, and this is what life is. But what I'm saying is that too often we try to look to and use the Bible and what is happening there and how things are done there in the current world.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. Well,
I'm back, guys. Can you hear me?
Justification, using the Bible to justify. Yeah.
By the way, you won't see my picture because it's in my bedroom, so I will leave it out.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me now?
We hear you and see you, and apparently you're live again.
Yeah. I'm sorry. My internet cut out for reasons that are not clear to me. Okay, so where we had been before I disappeared was that we are sort of in agreement that he is trivializing how profound our social justice concerns are as a part of our religion. All right, it's not a mood; it's a mitzvah. On the other hand, as Jay said, there is a process of sort of updating or application of interpreting our tradition in order to apply to the current situations that we have around us. And when we do that, there is always the danger that we will associate with the cause and then distort the Torah in order to justify that association. To mention again one example, and that is that when you look at Jewish Voices for Peace, for example, or If Not Now, that their willingness to endanger the lives of 6 million Jews in order to accomplish something that they consider to be sort of, let's call it the humanitarian demands of the Torah. Do we really think that that's the way the Torah works? That for the sake of any particular moral standing, that it's okay to risk 6 million lives, to take away from them the possibility of self-defense because you have this moral principle? Do we really think that's the way the Torah worked?
Yeah,
I doubt that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. I think they tend to be idealists. And I think that it's very easy for idealists to identify with the underdog.
Right.
And I think that, and a lot of that, I think that's a lot of what comes into play in their ideology, in their decision to support, let's say, the Palestinians, for example, at the expense of Israel. It's right. There's no balance.
Right.
It's all or none. It's an extremist position, just as the ultra reactionaries have their extremist positions.
Right.
No different. It's just the other side of the scale.
Right. So let me mention one example that had a big impact on me when I was growing up. There was a time in New York in the 1960s that Black activists were demanding to take over pulpits in synagogues in New York to speak about the social ills in the Black community. And there was a kind of implied sort of physical threat. They would announce that they're going to be taking over the altar in such and such a place, in such and such a shul. And it wasn't like, being invited as a guest speaker by the rabbi. It was this sort of, threat, takeover. So one of the activists, declared that they were going to be taking over the bima on some Friday night in a Reform shul in Manhattan. And the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, under Mayor Kahana, announced that if he tried to go into that shul, they would be there and break his legs. And you had all of these tough Jews from Brooklyn showing up with baseball bats, standing at the front of the synagogue. And of course, the guy didn't try to come into the synagogue, didn't try to take it over. And what was really interesting to me, well, first of all, I thought that was like, when I was 18 years old, I thought that was a really gutsy thing to do. But on top of that, the controversy about it, like, how dare you threaten somebody like that? And I remember saying, wait a second, what are you condemning the JDL for? Didn't anybody condemn this guy for threatening to take over a synagogue? You think that's okay, but it's not okay to say, we'll break your legs if you try? I thought there was a real imbalance there. The rabbi of the shul condemned the JDL. I was looking at this and I was saying something's really, really screwed up about this. But there was that, bizarre sense of, I will undercut my own protection, my own best interests, because of this cause that deserves to be heard. How does one counteract that? And Liel Leibovitz says as follows: don't get me wrong. I take no inherent issue with progressive values, nor do I believe that they're positively no place in, that they've no that they have no that they've positively no place in Judaism. But progressive values, or conservative convictions, or libertarian streaks, or any other variety of ideological sentiments have no place in religion unless they spring exclusively and clearly and forcefully from theology. Otherwise, the city of God and the city of man become one and the same, a dull and loud place in which no spirit can ever soar. And I think that there's a really nice formulation there that sure, Judaism can have all kinds of social value concerns and demand all kinds of social value activism, all right? But the way to get there is from the inside out, not from the outside in. The way to get there is to go in depth into our texts and to listen to them, to learn from them, to let them shape us and direct us. And in doing that, not only sort of grounds what become our social activist concerns, but it also allows us to pursue those social activist concerns in a way that is respectful of and integrated with what the rest of our religion is about. Okay, so going back to the Palestinian example, the wife of my teacher, Nina Sobelman, is very actively involved in a wonderful group called Tag Meir. So, little background. There's something called Tag Machir, which means price tag. And this is a kind of crime, retaliatory crime by radical Jewish settlers, that if they don't like a decision made by the army or the government or the courts or whatever, they will then go and destroy Palestinian cars or uproot Palestinian trees or spray paint Palestinian buildings and write on what they're doing and write graffiti, Tag Machir, price tag. This is the price we're going to make you pay when you pass a law or something that we don't like. It's an extraordinary arrogance. There was just, you could read about it just yesterday, there was a massive police action against the Tag Machir cult. All right. There is an organization that challenges the Tag Meir people, the Tag Machir people, called Tag Meir. It means the price of enlightenment, basically. And this is an organization that we would all agree with, that after Tag Machir goes into a Palestinian village and spray paints the mosque, Tag Meir goes into the village and helps them repaint the mosque and get rid of the graffiti, or sits and mourns with them over the loss of their property and so forth, and tries to, work towards some kind of reconciliation with them. All right. And these are people that are, Zionists down to their fingertips, living in Israel, serving the army, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But their reading of what Judaism demands is a much deeper and much more consistent reading than the ugly radicalism of the Tag Machir people, who claim to be following the Torah, but in fact are violating it every day by their contempt of authority. So you can have all kinds of good progressive things coming out of our Torah tradition, but that's the point. It comes out of our Torah tradition. The Tag Meir people trying to do the right thing, they're not doing it because the Swedish parliament voted on it and thought it was a good idea. They're doing it because of their deep reading of what the Torah says. And it is that deep reading of Torah, that's the one sort of, anchor that we have. That's the one, that's the one consistent base that we have, that we can share when we have our own internal dialogue about what is the right thing to do. So friends, we are way over our time, I see. I want to remind you that tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, we're going to be having our discussion about God and evil. You should be able to see the texts for that both online, and also an email is being sent out today that has the text that we're going to be studying tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Also, I want to remind you to look for the notification about the Sustainable Nation film that will be showing in celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And one other thing, and that is if you go to Israel21c.org, they've got an array of absolutely beautiful pictures about Israel to sort of use as a celebration for Yom Ha'atzmaut. We can't come together to celebrate it, but if we're all looking at these pictures, we'll have, believe me, we'll all have the same feelings about it. Okay, so we're going to sign off now. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.